In the early hours of November 10, 1906, a small mining town in the heart of the Pennsylvania coalfields was struck by a tragedy, so intense that its echoes would haunt the industry for decades. Below the surface of the earth, 254 men and boys were hard at work, their lives unknowingly hanging by a thread. All it took was a single spark igniting, a horrific explosion that would bury them alive, sealing their fate in the unforgiving darkness. As a chilling silence descended over the mine after the blast, it became clear that something far worse than the accident itself had happened. The survivors faced a terror far beyond their comprehension, a race against time to escape, and a realization that some may never see daylight again. This is their horrifying story, and as always, viewer discretion is advised. The mine in question was the Cherry Mine, located in Cherry, Illinois. At the time, it was considered one of the most advanced mines in the region, but this would not protect its workers from the unthinkable dangers lurking underground. The Cherry Mine disaster is just one in a long line of dark events in mining history. Events that highlight the brutal and often fatal risks miners have faced while digging for coal. This tragedy serves as a powerful reminder of the human cost behind the comforts of modern society and the lives sacrificed for the pursuit of energy. The day of the explosion, the morning of November 10, 1906, began like any other. At 7 a.m., the whistle blew, signaling the start of the day's shift. Inside the mine, 350 miners, the vast majority of them men and boys, descended into the tunnels of the Cherry Mine. The mine itself was a sprawling labyrinth of narrow passages and shafts, designed to extract the valuable coal that powered homes and industries across the nation. But beneath the seemingly mundane routine of the miners' workday, there was a hidden deadly force, an accumulation of methane gas. Methane, a colorless, odorless gas, is a byproduct of coal extraction. When trapped in confined spaces, it can easily ignite from a single spark, and once lit, it burns fiercely, consuming everything in its path. It only takes a tiny spark, perhaps, from a spark of an engine, a miner's tool, or even static electricity, and the consequences are catastrophic. On that fateful day, the spark came. At approximately 9:15 a.m., a massive explosion ripped through the mine. The force of the blast was so strong that it was felt miles away. The ground trembled, and an enormous cloud of smoke and debris billowed out from the mine's entrance, quickly followed by a second explosion that echoed even louder than the first. The aftermath? A race against time. The immediate aftermath of the explosion left the workers in chaos. The force of the blast had knocked out ventilation systems, causing the tunnels to fill with smoke and debris. A large number of miners were killed instantly, either by the explosion itself or by the collapsing shafts. The survivors found themselves trapped in a vast underground tomb, with no light, no fresh air, and no way to communicate with the outside world. They were plunged into the suffocating darkness. Some miners had been close enough to the explosion to be burned or severely injured. Others, though, were fortunate enough to be deeper in the mine where the blast had less direct impact. Still, all of them faced an immediate and terrifying challenge: escaping alive. The survivors had to navigate the collapsed tunnels, avoid falling debris, and figure out a way to reach the surface before they succumbed to the smoke and fumes. Despite their best efforts, many of the miners were trapped in the mine for days. Rescue efforts were hindered by the extensive damage to the mine's structure. The rescue teams faced obstacles at every turn, and the narrow tunnels made it nearly impossible to reach the survivors in time. The collapse of rescue operations, as word of the disaster spread, the entire town of Cherry was gripped by fear. Families of the miners gathered around the entrance to the mine, desperate for news. For days, rescue efforts were hampered by the constant threat of further explosions and the presence of toxic gases in the mine. Despite the best efforts of emergency responders and volunteer rescue teams, they were unable to reach the trapped miners quickly enough. It wasn't until November 13th, 3 days after the explosion, that a breakthrough occurred. Rescue teams had managed to break through into one of the mine's lower tunnels. However, by this time, most of the survivors had already died. The miners who had been trapped the longest had succumbed to carbon monoxide poisoning, unable to escape the overwhelming fumes that filled the mine. When the final rescue operation was completed on November 15th, the death toll stood at 254. The tragedy was not only a result of the explosion itself, but also the lack of safety regulations and proper evacuation procedures. Miners had been left with no adequate means of escape, and the disaster was compounded by the inadequate infrastructure that failed to prevent it. The dark history of mining, the Cherry Mine disaster, is just one example of the dangers miners have faced throughout history. In the late 19th and early 20th centuries, mining accidents were tragically common. Miners worked in horrific conditions, often for long hours in dark, damp tunnels, with little regard for their safety. Accidents like these were seen as just another part of the job, and many workers had no choice but to risk their lives for the promise of a paycheck. Over the years, the mining industry became a focal point for labor movements and calls for reform. In the wake of the Cherry Mine disaster, new regulations were introduced to improve safety and working conditions for miners. The United States government passed the Federal Coal Mine Health and Safety Act of 1969, which introduced stricter safety standards and greater oversight for the industry. But even with these reforms, mining remains a dangerous occupation to this day. Despite the advancements in safety technology and regulations, the horrors of mining continue to affect workers. Every year, miners are still injured or killed in accidents that should never have happened. As we look back at the dark history of mining disasters like the Cherry Mine explosion, it serves as a reminder of the dangers that workers have faced and continue to face. The name of progress. The legacy of the Cherry Mine disaster. The Cherry Mine disaster remains one of the deadliest mining accidents in U.S. history. In the years that followed, the families of the victims fought for justice and accountability. However, despite the overwhelming evidence of negligence and the devastating loss of life, no one was ever held criminally responsible for the disaster. The tragedy did, however, spark major changes in mining regulations. The public outcry in the wake of the disaster forced the government to take a closer look at the safety practices in mines across the country. The result was a series of reforms designed to improve the conditions for workers and prevent future accidents. Still, the memory of the 254 miners who perished in the Cherry Mine disaster lingers as a symbol of the dangers of unchecked industrial growth and the need for greater attention to worker safety. The incident not only highlighted the risks of mining, but also brought attention to the broader issue of labor rights and the exploitation of workers. The horrifying fate of miners buried alive at the Cherry Mine is a chilling reminder of the dangers that workers face in dangerous industries. It speaks to the dark history of the mining trade, where workers were often treated as expendable commodities in the pursuit of profit. The Cherry Mine disaster, alongside countless other mining tragedies, serves as a stark reminder of the need for vigilance, reform, and respect for the lives of those who work to fuel our societies. The legacy of the Cherry Mine disaster is not just one of loss and tragedy, but also of resilience and change. The sacrifices of those who perished in the mine ultimately led to reforms that made mining safer for future generations. Yet, the lives lost remain a solemn tribute to the dangers of industrialization and the constant battle between profit and human life. As we reflect on the fate of the miners, let us never forget the price that was paid for the progress we enjoy today. And let us remember the lives of those who perished beneath the Earth's surface, sacrifices made in the name of progress, but at a cost too high to ignore. If you like this content, please subscribe.